Hello, my name is Rian, and in this session we will look at drawing the shadows of circles. So let's start. We're going to use Krita for this session, so I'll show you how to do that. In Krita, find the grid tab and click on Show Grid. Change that to Isometric. Change the angle to 26,5. Oops. And 26,5. I'm going to make this about 70 pixels. Let's see what it looks like. Yes, I'm happy with that. Right, so we've done the shadows of planes so far, and we're going to use the same principles to draw the shadows of circles. So if you haven't seen that tutorial, please watch that first, because it's important, because we're going to use the same principles. So let's start off with drawing a square, something like that. Right, so I'm going to do the square in blue. The guides I'll do in an orangey color. Let's do that. So from corner to corner, I'm going to draw a cross. And then halfway through, we want to have another division line so that we find the halfway point between these areas. This the halfway point for this edge and that edge. And we're going to do a vertical line as well. Now, like I've said in previous tutorials about circles, we want to use the diagonal lines and divide those into thirds, more or less. So I'm going to disable the grid for a moment. So we want to divide that in thirds, the same there and the same there. And then we can use that third as a guiding point for our circle. Right. Oh, it's a very rough circle. Okay, something like that. Create a new layer by pressing the plus sign in the Layers tab. And let's call this circle plane. And the new layer we'll call circle shadow. Right, so I'm going to use the blue again to draw my shadow. Right. Let's create a new layer and call these shadow guides. Now remember, we said that we want to determine the angle of our sun or sunlight, and then the altitude. So let's start off with the angle. I'm going to create a new angle like that. Keep that parallel to each other. Someone's hammering away next door. Boy. Right. And then we said we want to determine the angle of the sun, or the altitude, how high the sun sits. So the higher the sun sits, the lower the shorter the shadow will be. The lower the sun sits, the longer the shadow will be. So depending on how low your sun will be, the longer the shadow will be. So let's use that long shadow and draw a line from there to there. So this is how long the shadow will be. Now remember, this line needs to follow our grid line. So we need to keep to that, and that's going to be our shadow. So then let's go to circle shadow and use the same blue colors again. So blue for the block. Let's put that layer on top. And let's reduce the guide's opacity a little bit. Right, so we've got that. So circle shadow, and that's going to be our shadow. Right. Then we want to use that same color for the guideline. So draw across from corner to corner. And then we want to divide this in half, divide that in half. And then we're going to use thirds for the diagonals again to draw our circle. Okay, so here it goes. So that's the basics of it. Let's put this to the side. And like we did with the previous, with the planes, we're going to create a new layer. And this time we want to lift the circle off the ground. So I'm just going to draw a very light line for the ground plane. So that's the ground. So the circle would have sat on that line if it was on the ground, but we're going to move it up by 2 blocks. Like so. Right. So no matter how high you make it, you always want to know where this would have sat on the ground, because that's going to determine where your shadow will fall on the ground plane. So then we do the same again. Divide that in half, half. Oi, oi, oi. Right, half line again, vertical half, and now we can draw our circle in. Right. And let's do the shadow again. So let's create a new layer, which we'll call Circle Guides 2. This time, alright, so for this one, the light is coming from that way. Now remember, when you've got a lot of objects in one scene that are related to each other, always keep the sun from the same direction. But to demonstrate how this works, I'm going to do the sun in a different way. So keep in mind that I'm going to do a wrong thing to teach you the right thing. So let's have the sun coming in from this way. So the angle of our shadow will go in that direction. And these lines always need to stay parallel. Okay, so remember to keep these lines always parallel to each other. What you could do, let's do that rather. So use the lasso tool and duplicate that layer. And then just move it over, and that way you make sure that this line is parallel. Merge that with the previous one. Okay, so now we want to determine how high our sun sits in the sky. So let's assume that that's going to be the sun's angle or altitude. So the sun's coming in at this angle in the sky. Right, let's do the same again and use the lasso tool and copy that, paste it, and move it over. right, until it touches that line and that corner. Let's do that again, but this time we're gonna use that corner, and let's do that yet again, and it needs to touch that corner. Right, so let's merge all of those together and create a new shadow layer. Circle shadow, and let's repeat the process. Now remember, we said that that corner there and that corner there and there and there, that's going to be our shadow that's being cast on the floor, because our circle has been lifted off the floor, and the way the light comes in from that angle and that altitude, this angle and this altitude will determine that the shadow is sitting right there. Okay, and then we do our guidelines. Let's make the opacity lower for the guidelines, and then circle. We want to do the same thing again, cross, and do a cross in there. Let's group that together, Control G, and let's move that there, and let's lighten or reduce the opacity. Oh, something's not in the group. So, everything's in the group. There we go. Lower the opacity, then create a new layer and let's call that drawing, and pick a black color, or you can make it a blue color, whatever color fancies you. I'm gonna do a deep blue color like that, and I'm gonna use an ink brush, and let's zoom in it a little bit. And I want to enable that. I'm going to use the same drawing, but it's actually not correct, because you need to have the sun coming in from the exact same direction if you have a lot of objects in the same scene. But hopefully this will make sense when you view this tutorial. Okay, yeah, let's do a bit of shading. And let's put the grid on again. Right, so let's draw a floor, because this will make sense, will make more sense in relation to a floor. So floor, and I'm going to use a brownish color like that. Let's put the floor at the top. Right, let's make the floor multiply so that it interacts with the lines. There we go. So that looks a little bit more convincing. So just to recap again, you need to understand where the light is coming in for each of your scenes. And when you have this scene, every single object, light and shadow, will be in the same direction. When you've got this lighting in your scene, every object's lighting will be in from that direction. So this is just to demonstrate how you can move that shadow around your circle object. But keep in mind that we will always stick to one kind of light source, and we'll keep all of the shadows for that light on all of the objects in the scene. Hope that makes sense. See you in the next session.